what's the state of AI deployment in different business verticals.
Enterprises, at least the more mature ones and the more advanced ones, are going from initial POC pilots to enterprise wide deployments. How you can actually scale this in terms of the number of use cases. How do I actually make sure that I'm training the model with the right data, the current data that has been sanitized for privacy issues, personal identifiable information issues. You always don't need the very large language models. The larger the model, the more is the cost of compute, right?
Hello and welcome to The Interface, the Hindus podcast to make sense of the accelerating pace of change underpinned by technology. I'm your host, John Xavier. Today's episode is powered by AMD Ryzen AI Processors.
In today's episode, we will be looking at the return on investment in AI projects by unpacking some real-world impact of Gen AI to business bottom lines. Our discussion will deep dive into the challenges of AI deployment, cost of digital transformation, and whether the promised returns are materializing. We will also explore AI use cases across banking, automotive, retail, and healthcare sectors. Joining me to discuss whether businesses are truly reaping the rewards of their investment in Gen AI is Mr. D.R. Balakrishna, more popularly known as Bali, Infosys' head of AI and automation. Mr. Bali, welcome to the interface. Glad to have you on the platform.
Thank you, John. My pleasure to be here in your podcast and look forward to an interesting discussion.
So I think we can kick it off. So we've been doing a regular round of discussions with our key opinion makers on what's happening with Gen AI. And we are at a point where we're trying to see where have all these deployments been going to, and what's the state of AI deployment in different business verticals. Could you give a sense of, from Infosys' standpoint, what are some of the experiences and what's the journey been like?
Yeah, it's a very pertinent question, right? As we all know, right, once Chat GPT, OpenAI's Chat GPT actually came into the fray, a lot of things actually changed. There was a big focus on how you could look at leveraging generative AI in the enterprise space. Companies have been working in machine learning, deep learning, but generative AI was new. It was been around for some time, but I think the whole Chat GPT actually brought a lot of focus into how you could use generative AI. In the generative AI space, the initial work that we used to see last year was a lot about doing initial POCs, pilots. How do you actually apply it in the enterprise context? Will it really have applicability in enterprises other than in the consumer space? But now we see more and more maturity in the types of engagement. Enterprises, at least the more mature ones and the more advanced ones, are going from initial POC pilots to enterprise wide deployments. How you can actually scale this in terms of the number of use cases, scale it in terms of impact, addressing some of the challenges that actually come along with that. So we're seeing a lot more maturity in at least a few of the engagements that we are doing with our clients. And most organizations are now looking at how do you progress from the initial POC pilots to significant enterprise deployments and return on investments on that.
Can you give a curve of how this maturity looks like from, let's say, an organization coming to say that we want to do something around AI, and then a company like Infosys? How does the curve look like for an organization? Let's if when we'll pick a vertical, let's say banking. How does the curve look like? Could you explain?
Yeah, the curve is actually pretty similar for most industries, right? It is right. Initially, most clients are looking at, can you help me understanding how we can actually apply in our industry, right? And when you actually do that, you look at the most use cases to actually prove the concept, right? So there would be a pilot, there would be right. You pick one or two use cases. There's not a lot of science that goes into which use cases you're doing. You're looking at right, some early wins, right? Now, after you go past that, and then you do a few, right? In some cases, now the clients are realizing, okay, right, you actually have shown that you can actually do, but now how do I get, as you were actually alluding to in the introduction, how do I get a significant return on investment? How do I make significant change to my business, right? And when you think about that, there are multiple challenges that you have to actually address, right? You have to be able to address how do you systematically uh, first identify the use cases that can give you the best return, not just the easiest use cases, but the use cases that can make needle moving impact, right? How do you actually address the whole aspects of implementing this responsibly, right? When you're talking about enterprise wide deployment and production deployment, and many of these industries like banking are in a regulated industry, right? So they have to actually take care of issues around IP security, biases, trustworthiness, all of those aspects that becomes quite important. Then right, the biggest challenge is around data. How do I actually make sure that I'm training the model with the right data, the current data, data that has been sanitized for privacy issues, personal identifiable information issues, right? The whole gamut of challenges that comes around with data. Now, technologies are actually changing rapidly. There are newer models that are coming every day, right? So to speak. And so, how do I actually create my solutions in such a way that it doesn't become obsolete in a few months, right? So, there are challenges around that. And there are challenges around talent, right? How do I actually make sure that I am able to create and build talent internally, externally, to be able to do all of these things, right? There is a big aspect of change management also. Organizations are used to a rule based way of actually working, and set processes, defined processes. Gen AI brings a different kind of paradigm. And how do you actually manage the whole change management? So now, when you go from the initial POCs to this kind of enterprise-wide usage, you have to tackle all of these challenges. You need to have a strategy around all of these things. And so the life cycle would be the POCs, few pilots, moving this into production, and then you would actually say, okay, I need a systematic way of actually being able to do that. So you actually create platforms. For example, for one of the clients, we actually created a platform which made it easier for them to, and it addressed some of the challenges that I actually talked about. And so it is not a use case by use case deployment, right? The platforms actually address common patterns of issues, and so then you are able to quickly deploy multiple use cases, and you see much better return on investment. And so you go from POCs to few engagements that you actually scale, and then you go into platform based where you are able to do more rapid deployments of use cases, and then right, enterprise wide usage. That is broadly the pattern that we are actually seeing. And the use cases also start becoming more and more sophisticated, more complex as you actually go.
Right. So you mentioned that almost all verticals are approaching this in the same way in terms of getting on their maturity curve. And data, of course, is a very important factor on how they kind of use AI. When you talk about these proof of concept, the POCs, at what point do you define and say, this is something that is working, and then we can actually scale it up? And how do you make a decision to say that this is something that we should experimenting something new?
So yeah, as I said, the in terms of maturity, every we're seeing that this is a common pattern: POC to few pilot use cases, productionizing it, and then actually looking at enterprise-wide deployment. The use cases, of course, are very different in each of the each of the industries, and then so for example, we look at it in what we call AI radar, right? In some industries, there is customer complexity that actually is a big portion. In others, there is people complexity, there is operational risk becomes quite high. So for financial services, for example, risk is a big factor, and then product complexity is different, right? And in different industries. So the where you actually for each industry, which are the areas to actually focus to get the best return becomes slightly different, but in terms of maturity, things actually go in a similar manner. Now, and the use cases, of course, right, there are some common patterns, but different industries have their own nuances and their own use cases. Now, in terms of how we have seen that actually happen is once you go from POCs, right? POCs typically would be you look at low hanging fruits. Where do you have some amount of data already that is well sanitized, right? You can actually show it actually working. So in the POC, it is more the focus is more on time to market, right? The ability to show something quickly within the organization. You have some ready data, you have idea of a use case, can actually demonstrate quickly. That's how you would approach the POC, right? Then when you actually go from the POCs to a scaled deployment of one or two use cases, then you try to address the other issues around that. You try to address issues around compliance for that, right? And then how do you right look at it architecturally, how do you actually make it scalable, and things around those nature as you actually scale it from the POCs to a few pilots. And then when you have to go beyond that to say I want to do this enterprise wide, then you have to actually step back and really think through the strategy. All right, what is my data strategy, how would I actually what is my enterprise responsible AI strategy, how do I actually build it in a way that I don't have to redo the investment each time for the use cases? Can I build things so that I can accelerate the deployment? So you think through a lot of these things and create the foundational blocks for the enterprise-wide deployment.
Right.
And on that note, a word about AMD Ryzen AI processors for professionals. AMD Ryzen AI brings the power of personal computing closer to you on an AI desktop, laptop, or mobile workstation. AMD Ryzen AI comes with a dedicated AI engine and powers hundreds of AI functions so you can rethink productivity for your workflows. AMD Ryzen AI is built directly into your PC, so your CPU and GPU can focus on other tasks while you use AI to help generate concepts and designs and accelerate your productivity. AMD Ryzen AI Processor delivers next-generation performance for demanding tasks from collaboration to content creation. AMD Ryzen AI processors are power efficient and they come with built-in Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.3 technologies, ensuring seamless connectivity. AMD Ryzen Pro processors offer enterprise-grade multi-layered protection, safeguarding your data from modern threats. Now, back to our conversation with Mr. Bali.
And as Infosys as an IT service provider has clients across the globe, and different countries are approaching responsible AI, irresponsible AI, and regulations surrounding AI differently. How are these conversations happening on projects right from let's say proof of concepts to pilots and then into scaling up systems?
Yeah, that is a very important question. In fact, that comes up as one of the key challenges that enterprise actually face to be able to scale AI, because right, most of these traditional enterprises are working in very regulated industries. So in the POC stage, usually you're just experimenting. You're not looking at scale deployment. So right, people tend not to actually think through the responsible AI significantly, right? Then, but when you are actually thinking about a few use cases that you want to actually scale, then you start looking at making sure that the data that you're using is right sanitized. You don't have any PI information. You're not creating any bias, right? You start addressing that, and then you make sure that the models that you're deploying are secure. So you actually start doing some of those things when you actually look at pilot deployment, right? Now, when you actually go into enterprise wide scale kind of deployments, then you realize that, well, this is very important aspect. You can't actually do each of these manually, use case by use case. You need a more systematic approach to be able to do that, right? So one of the things that we actually propose to our clients is, first of all, is to come up with right. We have come up with 12 dimensions of responsible AI. What does it mean to be responsible, and how do you actually mitigate the risk for each of these? And now, if you try to do a lot of this with manual processes, the cost of that becomes extremely high, right? So can you build some level of automated guardrails in what you're actually doing, so that some of those checks can actually be automated, just like we talk about it in cybersecurity. Same thing, even in responsible AI, the model security, the automated guardrails in terms of making sure that there is no IP leakage, you minimize hallucinations. All of that can actually be built in, right, as tools in your platform. So those starts coming in.
Can you break down those 12 dimensions to get a clearer sense on how these things apply?
So there are dimensions around. As examples, right? IP is a big dimension. How do you make sure that the model that you're using, right? There are no IP risks that actually come intrinsic in the model. The second one is that how do you make sure that your IP is actually protected, right? When you are actually using closed or open source models, right? Then there is aspects of privacy and right. For example, as part of the UA Act, you can't actually send any personal identifiable information, right? So you have to make sure that you don't have use any of that in the way that you're creating your AI use cases, right? Data security, how do you make sure that any of this data is actually completely actually secure, becomes important. Then you are looking for right, enterprise wide usage. Generative AI in particular, there is this concept of hallucinations. Sometimes you may actually get wrong answers. You might have seen some of that even in right, the consumer AI space, right? So how do we be able to detect that and make sure that hallucinations are minimized? And you have a, and what we actually advocate is that you have a score for hallucination, right? The confidence of the answer, right? And to be able to give the sources at which you're used to actually come at the answer, so that it can actually be verified before they actually use that is another dimension, and how you actually do that. Models itself, security of the models can be compromised, right? And right, how do you actually protect yourself from doing that? So these are some of the dimensions. We have also added a sustainability dimension to how you use responsible AI, right? Because right, the energy costs are actually significantly high, right? So we are looking at technologies to be able to reduce that. If you use, not always do you need a very large language model. Sometimes you can use a smaller large language model that has a smaller energy footprint. Sometimes it performs much better, and then you actually save on the energy cost. We are also experimenting with newer technologies for immersion cooling, etc., that are much more energy efficient. That is right, another dimension of how you're using AI responsibly.
Yeah, you mentioned about model security. So, what's been the experience for Infosys on using these different models? So, do you can you rate models based on a scale of security on which ones are more secure and which ones are something that you should be a little more worried about using in an enterprise context?
Uh, Not so much. So we have actually benchmarked different models that we actually use, both open source and closed models. But you have to, irrespective, you have to actually, whichever model, you will have to make sure that you're actually securing the model. Right? You can, the prompts could actually have jailbreak, right? They may actually create scenarios and to be able to get answers out of the model that you don't want to be able to, the model to be able to provide. So we have put, irrespective of the model, we have put guardrails around how do you check for jailbreaks, for example, right? And how do you secure your models from external attacks and things like that.
Right, right, got it. And I also want to get a sense on, given that you're heading up both AI and automation, and the process of digital transformation has been happening for more than a decade now at different organizations in different stages. So, how different is the digital transformation of the pre-GPT world to the post-GPT world?
So with automation or classical automation, the way that we were actually looking at it is that can you actually map out a task or a process, and then are there parts of that that you can actually automate, and right, and that used to be around right, well defined processes with a well-defined workflow, and then you would actually automate parts of that, right? And manual repetitive well-defined processes and automating tasks around those well-defined processes. With AI, what actually happens is that you can actually bring in some inferencing and what we call intelligent automation, right? So for example, you have ability to, if there is a email, you can actually understand the intent of the email, and you can bring in those intelligence into this whole thing. And based on that intelligence, you could still actually say, okay, right, I for example, there is an email that is coming in, you can understand the intent of the email, and you can actually execute the tasks that are related to that email that we didn't have without AI before. All right. Now with there is this whole concept of agent framework. All right, you can do a higher order of intelligent tasks and actually get that that you could not do in a classical automation. All right. So for example, if you have to book a ticket from here to Delhi, now there are multiple considerations that you would have to actually take into right, for booking the ticket. You may actually need to look at right, your calendar and availability, right, when you can actually travel to Delhi. You may need to look at the weather for Delhi, right? You may need to look at when are the best, what are the airlines and flights that are available, and the cost of those flights, right? So with AI, you are able to have multi-agent frameworks. You have agents who are actually getting this information, and you are able to synthesize and say that taking all of these considerations, these are some of the options for you to actually do that, right? Which you were not able to do in the classical automation. But we see this as a continuum. We were able to do right, in classical automation, well-defined processes and tasks that you could actually automate. With AI, you are able to bring a lot more intelligence, right, in the way that you are actually approaching that, and you can actually blend it with the intelligence. So we call it intelligent automation that you can actually bring in, and now even higher order tasks, right, where it is not fully your not fully actually saying in if you go back to that flight example, you're not saying I want to book a flight from here to Delhi at this amount of, at this time and at this price range, and then you would go and do it. Now you're just saying I want to do it, and then is able to go and figure out aspects around that and actually execute a higher order task, right? So that's where we.
So, in that continuum, where do you think we are moving from, right, with this Gen AI and all these POC testing and then pilots? What's the next in line?
Yeah, so the technology is actually evolving rapidly, and there are higher capabilities that are actually coming and maturity that is coming in. The challenges for enterprises to adopt this are actually not just the technology, but a lot of the other things that I actually spoke about, right? You need to get your foundations right, you need to get your data right, you need to make sure you're using it in a responsible manner, right? You need to make sure that you're addressing issues around talent, scalable models, platforms. You have to do all of those things, and then, and in each of your industries, you're right. You need to look at where you actually get the best ROI and actually deploy it in those spaces, and that's what we actually work with enterprises and help them actually do.
Right. So, I want to get to the most important and saving that question for the last is how are businesses looking at this whole Gen AI revolution? Are they reaping the benefits out of it? Are they seeing real use cases coming to give them good bottom lines? What's the experience of that? Where do businesses see this taking them in their path to profitability?
So it varies, right? As I said, there are clients who are enterprises who are actually still in the experimentation phase, etc. And there it is more about proving it rather than right as trying to get significant business value out of that. There are other clients that have actually deployed a few use cases at scale, and they are actually starting to see some benefits out of that. But more mature clients are actually looking at how do I address these aspects to be able to get significant return of investment. See, the return of investment is always a key question, right? As you start to actually scale, and there are multiple ways you actually address that. One is how do you identify the right use cases itself, right? Not the most easy use cases, but how do you identify the right use cases? And as I mentioned, different industries have different pressure points, right? And so, how do you actually identify the right use cases for that? We have created industry blueprints for different industries. We have actually created a framework for identifying right where you would get the best value, right? So that is one part of it. The other one is that how do you actually manage the cost, right, equation on the return of investment so that you actually get better, right? So instead of doing it as each use case separately, then the cost actually tends to be higher. If you identify patterns of what you want to build, you can build platforms that can actually take some of these repeatable patterns. So for example, for one of our clients, we one of the common use cases was around being able to extract knowledge from documents, whether it is in finance space, whether it is in HR space, whether it is in their contract management space. So instead of doing this as separate use cases, we built a platform. We said anybody can bring their own documents and put it onto the platform, and then you have automated chatbot that is actually available, right? So once you do that, then your cost of incremental cost of actually deployments actually reduce, right? The other way that you can actually manage the cost is that you always don't need the very large language models. The larger the model, the more is the cost of compute, right? You can actually select, there are closed models, open source models that are smaller, less than 7 billion parameters, that can do the task. It cannot do everything, right? But if you are looking at semantic search, then there are models, smaller models that can do the task very well, and that brings down the cost, right? We talked about responsible AI. If you have to do check all of these things and you have to do this manually, then the cost becomes quite high, right? If you create a automated guardrails to do that, then the cost actually becomes less. So yeah, the ROI becomes a key question, but there are right, if you actually identify the right use cases, you figure out ways to manage the cost of that. We are seeing that the clients are able to generate right good returns on investments for in this space.
Right. So I think the platform-based method seems to be working. So picking out the specific use cases and trying to see what kind of works as a more foundational level of using an AI system. And also, like you mentioned, small language models are working better in some contexts than large language models. That is interesting to know. And thank you so much for taking your time, Sabali, to share your insights on how you're deploying Gen AI in your client context, and also giving an overview around how different organizations are looking at responsible AI and how this AI systems are being deployed in their organization. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for tuning into the Interface podcast, powered by AMD Ryzen AI Processors. Please do check out www.amd.com for more details about the product. For more such episodes on technology and innovation, tune in to The Interface on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Do share your comments with us at theinterface@thehindu.co.in. To keep yourselves updated with the latest tech, please go to thehindu.com or follow us on all social media platforms. Thank you.